Hey folks, I'm so happy to see you. Today, we will be dismantling the romanticism of Amish and plain folks in TV shows, movies, books, and media. So, grab your hats and bonnets, hold your buggy seats, make sure your horses are well watered, make sure you have plenty of water to drink, and don't be surprised if you feel the need to have a brandy old fashioned after this. It's time to giddy up and go. Let's start this show. Good evening, everybody. We have Stephanie Krebiel here again because we want to start off the new year properly. We gotta just really talk about how we're a little bit disobedient, although that's a bad word, huh, Stephanie?
Yes, it's terrible.
What about it is so terrible?
You know what? You know what I'm realizing? I can hear like my dad is watching this downstairs and I can hear it through the vent. So I need to put a pillow over the vent just a second. I'm visiting my parents right now.
Uh-oh. Hi, Stephanie's parents. Thank you so much for borrowing or allowing Stephanie to be a little disobedient today. We
Yeah.
greatly appreciate your sacrifice here.
Oh, okay. I think we're good now.
Yeah.
Yep.
So last time we were kind of watching this video that I had recorded with Harvey Yoder. I don't know if some of you have seen it, whatever. We stopped off at about 29 minutes, but I was going to restart it a little bit before we stopped off, and then we can go from there.
Sure.
Do you have anything else you want to say before we start this train wreck?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to offer my like wishes of courage and hang in there with us to survivors who are watching, because I know it's tough. And the reason we're doing this is just so that you have some understanding of like the reasons why you don't you don't have to absorb this kind of manipulation and spiritual abuse.
Correct.
You know, that's what we're committed to doing. And like, you get to pace yourself if you're watching this and you're like, no, this is not what I want for
too
New Year's
much.
Day. Like, you can always come back and watch it later. Like, this is for survivors.
And it will be available afterwards. It'll be available on the website, YouTube, Facebook, like all different platforms. And you can watch it as slow as you want to. You don't have to watch it. If it's too much, it's too much. Be gentle to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important that you're gentle to yourself. So, okay, should we brave the firestorm?
Let's do it.
Is there no volume?
Completely goes away. You know, maybe when they become geriatric somewhere.
Well, and even then, I've worked in a nursing home before. I'm telling you, nope,
Exactly.
Doesn't go away.
So I just think it's the kind of thing where we have to practice a great deal more diligence in terms of providing accountability. Obviously, unless we, put these, have these people serve life sentences and be locked away, or if we, if we have them experience the death penalty or something, they're going to be around somewhere. They've got to be. Right. They've got to have the kind of accountability and oversight that is rigorous for their own good.
Hold up. What is this rigorous oversight he's talking about?
I don't know. I mean, I would ask him that. I would like to know what he means by that.
Okay. continue any day now. I don't remember if I. What is it doing? No. Let's see. Because there was a part in here where I think we missed it. These research articles about
on committing an offense at some point in their life, even though they might thoroughly repent, acknowledge their wrong, make whatever restitution possible, that the possibility of reoffending never completely goes away. Maybe when they become geriatric somewhere.
well, then even then, I've worked in a nursing home before. You got something to say?
Me?
Yeah, you.
I'm just shaking my head at like the third time hearing him say maybe when they become geriatric, because it's like we know sometimes the geriatric offenders are the most dangerous one because everybody like lets them get away with everything and assumes that they can't do anything. And I'm so sick of that misconception. So that's.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
And you tried to insert that, and he was not really interested in finding out what your nursing home experience was. Funny, interesting. Anyway.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I have my own nursing home experiences.
I'm telling you, nope, exactly. Doesn't go away.
So I just think it's the kind of thing where we have to practice a great deal more diligence in terms of providing accountability. Obviously, unless we, put these, have these people serve life sentences and be locked away, or if we, if we have them experience the death penalty or something, they're going to be around somewhere. They've got to be, they've got to have the kind of accountability that an oversight that is rigorous for their own good, as well as the good of the community. And it's not unlike an addiction, like drug addiction or something, or alcohol. And as you know, that one of the first things that is said in every AA meeting by every attender, my name is Harvey Yoder and I'm an alcoholic. Just recognize that even though I might have been sober for 10 years, I recognize that I am vulnerable to reoffend, and I need the support and accountability provided by open kind of connections with people like in an AA group.
So you think that sex offenders, and especially child sex offenders, they have an addiction?
Well, I don't know whether the addiction in those two cases I mentioned, and that is drug or substance abuse addiction and sex addiction, are necessarily identical, but I think there is a lot of overlap. There's a lot of similarity, and we have to respond. Again, unless we get rid of sex offenders and just lock them up or end their life, we're going to have to find some way as communities who are caring and responsible to make sure that they are protected and the victim.
Okay, let's talk about this. What is he trying to get at with this is an addiction?
Well, so you asked him to clarify, and then he proceeded to. I mean, did I hear this right? He said, "Well, okay, it's not drug addiction and alcohol addiction. Maybe we shouldn't equate those with sex addiction." And I'm like, did you just equate sex addiction with perpetration of sexual abuse? Because that was a big step. What's going on there? That's not like that. That conflation is very problematic, and it is a mainstay of plain communities enabling offenders to act as though sexual abuse, it can be understood as an addiction, and sex offenders need to be treated as addicts. Again, we're ignoring the abuses of power. And clinically, that conflation is, at this point, pretty passé. I don't know if that's the, the mode through which he's operating when he treats offenders, if that's what he does. But just talking about it like an addiction means that you're gonna ignore some of the deep motives behind sexual abuse. It's troubling to, yeah.
Mm. Now let me ask you this, because you were a liberal Mennonite, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So did they consider like homosexuality to be a sex addiction problem? Like,
Some people, like, are you talking about like Mennonite Church USA?
yeah, something, whatever you're familiar with.
There's no Mennonite Church USA has people who are all over the map when it comes to LGBT inclusion. And there's certainly Harvey is somebody who'd be a member of that denomination. He's part of Virginia Conference. There are certainly people who have those conflations. This idea that, homosexuality is a disease that needs curing, or like a besetting sin, or whatever language they use. Yeah. There's that. And then, at the end, then there are openly gay, pastors also in Mennonite Church USA. It depends on what individual conference they're in as to how well that goes in terms of acceptance from conference leadership. But there's a lot of ideological diversity within that denomination that I think would feel just completely bizarre to people from plain communities where, ideological consensus seems to be pretty much demanded. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it has a much wider variety, is what you're telling me.
It does. And Harvey being in Virginia Mennonite Conference, there's a variety of there's a variety of churches even within that conference, but that conference generally has very conservative leadership. So, Harvey is within a Mennonite conference that is more on the conservative end of things. But yeah, there's within MCUSA, they've been fighting.
There's a wide, it's like the alphabet soup of okay. Yeah.
I would say overall, the denomination itself, I still would not recommend it as a safe place for LGBT people at all. But individual churches are kind of all over the place.
Okay, that's fair. So we have a commenter that says sometimes prison is the right kind of accountability where they're watched 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to agree with that.
Yeah.
Oh, I have worked in nursing homes. One nursing home, an older male resident had been a pimp in his younger years. So gross. Yes, I can tell you that there are people in nursing homes that are very much offenders.
Yeah, any people who work in nursing homes know that the idea that there's no such thing as geriatric offenders is a lie.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So, shall we continue?
Sure. Let's keep going.
If it'll start. Why does it do this? I have problems, guys. Well, I guess we're a little bit technologically impaired.
Maybe it's spiritual interference.
It's the witchcraft portion of tonight's show. We're not supposed to be watching this. That's the problem.
Mm.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So where were we at? Let's see. I think. Oh wait, there's no sound. Let's try that again. We're having fun. Sorry, people. I'm the greatest. I never said I was a good technological person. Let's try it again.
Drug addiction or something,
Can you hear that?
or alcohol. And as you know, that one
Yeah, a
of the
little.
first things that
Yeah.
is said in every AA meeting by every attender, my name is Harvey Yoder and I'm an alcoholic. Just recognize that even though I might have been sober for 10 years, I recognize that I am vulnerable to reoffend, and I need the support and accountability provided by open kind of connections with people like in an AA group.
So you think that sex offenders? We already heard this.
The addictions in those two cases I mentioned, that is drug or substance abuse addiction and sex addiction, are necessarily identical, but I think there is a lot of overlap. There's a lot of similarity.
Yeah, he did. He
We
did
have
do that.
again, unless we get rid of sex
He
offenders
really
and just
did.
to lock them up or end their life, we're going to have to find some way as
With
communities
thoughts and
who
prayers
are
help.
caring and are protected and the victims are, for goodness sakes, protected, who are
Wait,
caring and responsible to make sure that they are protected and
did he just come on my stream and say to make sure sex offenders are protected? Is that what I just heard?
I don't know. It may have been victims. I didn't.
Okay, let's go back.
Go back.
And we have to respond, again, unless we get rid of sex offenders and just to lock them up or, end their life, we're going to have to find some way as communities who are caring and responsible to make sure that they are protected and the victims are, for goodness sakes, protected.
Yes, he really did. He really did. All right, can you enlighten me? What does this mean? Why are we protecting sex offenders?
Well, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot going on there. So I'm the way that he's talking about getting rid of sex offenders and locking them up, and he's sort of setting that up as like, well, unless we do this, we've got to figure out a way to deal with them. And I'm there's a lot going on because like I would say the same thing in a lot of ways. Like, it is unrealistic and, in a lot of ways, I think excessively punitive, or in a I mean, prison in and of itself is not the solution to stopping sexual violence. It's one tool, but prison itself is a place where a lot of sexual violence happens. So, there's that. Like, you can't our criminal legal system is a mess when it comes to getting offenders behind bars. And sentences, I mean, we don't have evidence that as a widespread solution, prison is working. So I'm not saying that because I don't think that, people who commit sex crimes should, I'm not arguing that nobody should go to prison. What I'm saying is it isn't, yeah, I mean, it in a lot of ways
It is.
It is. I mean, although it can,
Right.
It can also make them I mean, there's a whole other discussion about what happens to sex offenders in prison, and I'm not an expert on it. But I guess what I'm saying is that prison is only one. He's right that it's not the only solution, because if we say that the only solution is prison, then we're stuck without any other modes of accountability. And frankly, our system will fail us. Like, it's not a solution because we can't, like, the system isn't built. It was never built to hold all sex offenders accountable. Our laws protect sex offenders to a large extent. So I get that he's, saying, well, we need to have more solutions, but I don't think that he and I are coming from the same place when we say, well, unless we're going to lock them up or kill them, we have to have more accountability solutions. I think he's setting, I think he the fact that he moved from that to, well, we have to protect offenders and we have to protect victims. And I'm like, how many times are you going to conflate the two in your, like, yeah, go ahead.
Right. Well, so I think that part of, like, we have all of these sexual crimes that occur, and it's like not just an Amish or plain people problem, but there are certain unique things that happen within Amish and, Anabaptist churches, right? And so
Mhm.
those are unique to our experiences, and those are things that we can speak about with clarity, right?
Mhm.
But when it comes to solutions, what are the solutions? Do we have, like, um, let's say, any type of, like, perpetrator counseling available outside of a prison system? Do we have that available outside of the prison system for perpetrators?
You mean in society in general?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think we have nearly enough solutions out of prison. And I like, does counseling work for perpetrators? Like,
that's what I would like
sometimes,
to know.
yeah, I mean, lifetime therapy, sure, the right kind of therapy that is about accountability. Because frankly, often as somebody who works with lots of survivors, I hear lots of like, it's not that like perpetrators never go to therapy. Often, especially if they're skilled manipulators, perpetrators manipulate their therapists.
Truth.
Um, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say possibly that's happened to our friend Harvey in the past, given I really I think he's mischaracterizing
Oh,
sexual perpetration of sexual abuse as sexual addiction. And the idea that, like, yes, I'm not going to argue that sex addiction is never present, but that is a completely, like, therapeutically unsound conflation. So, it has to be the right kind of therapy. But also, like, the thing that we focus on it into account always is like, okay, whatever happens in the legal system, we may or may not have power over that. We have very little power in the system at large. What we can do is take away authority, access, and regard. And the person's authority within the community, their access to vulnerable populations, the good regard of the people in the community. In order to take those things away, you have to have transparency, and you have to have people who are willing to say, you can't come here because you abuse children. You can't come, you can't teach Sunday school. You don't have the right to go through your life without people knowing that you've committed these offenses, because you are dangerous if you're allowed to operate in secret. So my question for Harvey is, when he says rigorous accountability, what kind of rigorous accountability is he talking about? Like, that's what comes next. Like, how is he? And I
well,
mean, I'm skeptical already, because he seems to think that that perpetration of sexual abuse and sexual violence is the same thing as sex addiction. That already tells me that there's something vital about the abuse of power inherent in sexual abuse that he's not grasping. Yeah,
no,
obviously,
yeah,
never let them in leadership ever, including unlicensed counseling. I mean,
I,
that
yeah.
should be so obvious. It's frustrating that, like,
Well,
she has to say that. Like, that shouldn't be obvious to, yeah.
right.
Yeah. Anyway.
So let's find out what our dear friend Harvey says next.
All right.
So, thank you. So,
I mean, protected, not, I mean, only in the sense that we do whatever necessary to make sure that they don't uh, feel like they can reoffend and get by with it.
gotcha. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So, should we take them into our homes? Like, what should we be doing?
Well, I need to brush up on my information here, but I know I know there is a kind of program where every offender has some other responsible adults with whom they meet on a regular basis, just like people do with Alcoholics Anonymous or something, and where they provide oversight. So we have to find some way. I don't know that I have. I might be able to get you some information about a kind of program that aims to do what I'm describing.
I would be very interested in seeing that information because some of like what the research shows is that, you know, people convicted of child molestation, they continue to recidivate regardless of how that is defined for more than 25 years.
Hmm.
But recidivism rates of those convicted of rape tend to taper off within 5 years. And it
Hmm.
comes from this study specifically. And then when you start talking about it, the risk then for child molestation is longer than other sexual crimes.
Hmm.
Their peak risk is 5 to 10 years after their release.
Yeah, and pedophilia is another phenomenon that we need to take a hard look at as a psychological diagnosis. I think is a kind of uh, not fully understood sort of orientation toward having a fascination with young boys or girls as compared to the normal kind of uh, passion we tend to develop for people uh, who are fellow adults. And so I'm always hesitant to call this an illness, the pedophilia thing, although it is listed in the DSM-5, and all other diagnostic manuals as something that needs to be treated and taken seriously, of course. But there is a kind of difference in the way some brains are wired in terms of just like, you know, I am very strongly wired for heterosexual attraction, and some people are wired for attraction of people of their own gender. And we don't know altogether why that is, but no matter what it is, every person is responsible for their own behavior and their own misbehavior. And there's never any excuse, regardless of what kind of diagnosis one might have, for violating an innocent child.
Well, and I think that people often, one, think that violating a child is simply a sex addiction, when in fact, violating a child or abusing anybody, abuse is not about actual sex. Did you know that? Like, sexual abuse of a child is not necessarily about sex. It's about power and control.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's why they repeat it over and over and over. They get a sense of power and control from it. At least that's what I was taught in therapy. So, hey Stephanie, would you like to weigh on in on the whole like pedophilia is an orientation comment? Not unlike like heterosexual or like,
Yeah.
homosexuality, which he couldn't even bring himself to say the word.
I mean, I again, it's a whole mess of things in there because I'm not like I certainly wouldn't say that we don't need more research on people who fit the clinical definition of pedophilia. Like I wouldn't like, I think we do. I think we need to understand like why that happens, but not like out of the context of social life and power. Because I mean, here's, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to speak about it in psychological language. But what I am going to say is, in the history of the European dominated world, the Western world, to use that terminology, we have a history of men being allowed to treat women and children and people of non-cisgenders as property. Like, our propensity for treating human beings as property in Western civilization is part of why we have such an egregious problem with child sexual abuse, because you can go all the way back to the Roman Empire and see that one of the ways that patriarchs asserted ownership over women and children and their slaves was through rape. And so we can't, which is you called him out, I think, very clearly. Like, this is about power and control. It's not like talking about addiction. And, everything that, on the one hand, he's given some good lip service to accountability, and, we can't trust offenders not to reoffend. On the other hand, he's continually pulling his analysis of what motivates perpetration into the world of illness, even as he says, illness and maybe sexual orientation. Then, and it's like, I think there's something really problematic. I mean, I increasingly, I have stopped using the word pedophile to describe people who sexually abuse children, just because I feel like all the clinical baggage involved with it takes it, like if somebody raped a child, they're a child rapist, okay? Whether they fit the clinical definition of pedophilia is not of very much interest to me as an advocate, because one of my jobs is to spread awareness about the danger that person poses. And I know that, like, sometimes when you talk to people, who are psychologists who spend a lot of time understanding the psychology of people who commit these crimes, I know that they will frequently say, well, not everybody who commits sexual violence against children is a pedophile. Not everybody who, would fit the definition of a pedophile actually commits sexual abuse against children. Fine, psychologists can have that conversation. I'm not convinced Harvey Yoder has a damn idea what he's talking about, because he's just saying a lot of stupid stuff. But what interests me as a person who is invested in accountability within communities is we hold people accountable for what they do. We don't like we are so obsessed with perpetrator psychology in this country. I mean, how many shows do we have about narcissistic, sociopathic men who destroy people's lives? We're obsessed with their psychology. And I am more interested in the question of how we hold them accountable than I am in the psychology of why they're attracted to children. Because, being I'm not even, like, why they're attracted to children doesn't even, for me, capture what they do. Are they attracted to children? That's not the question that interests me. The question is, are they violating children sexually? Are they violating children's boundaries in ways that groom them for, like, physical violation? Are they emotionally, like, interacting with children in ways that are sexual or developmentally inappropriate? Those are the questions that interest me. And those are the questions that we need to act on, not just obsessing endlessly about what the psychology is of offenders. And, he's continually mentioning offenders and victims, as basically like in the same breath.
It's almost as if, and this is kind of like my personal opinion, it's almost as if you can't have a conversation about victims and what services victims need
Mhm.
and the things that survivors have encountered and what the
Mhm.
communities need to do better. You can't have that conversation without talking about offenders in the minds of Anabaptist people,
Mhm.
because for them, if we leave the perpetrators of the abuse out of the conversation, then um we're not being giving them grace or extending them grace
Right. Yeah, and it's like I would say, yeah, perpetrators need to be part of the conversation, but they need to be part of the conversation because we still have to
over
live
there.
with the consequences of what they do, and we have to figure out how to hold them accountable. But like this obsession with giving them grace and forgiveness is, we don't have within Anabaptist circles, um we don't have resources for doing that in ways that aren't spiritually abusive.
Correct.
We just
Sh-
don't. I mean, yeah,
there just is no space for that. Shall we continue?
sure.
I could be wrong, but
Well, I think it's maybe not an either or here. It is power and control, obviously, and child is very vulnerable and powerless, and that makes this such a terrible thing. But of course, uh, I don't know of any exceptions. A person does get some kind of sexual orgasm or something in the process that where pleasure is somehow in the picture, even though, as you say, that's not the primary thing, and it's not as simple as just saying, well, you just want to have an orgasm, and the child is because this is something.
you think
Um, he like there is there's no understanding of rape culture here. Like, um, well, maybe it's pleasure and maybe it's power. No,
no,
power
like
is sexualized. That's part of why sexual violence is like that's part of how it's built into our culture is we have an eroticized idea of domination. That's rape culture. He's trying to separate. You said it's about power, and then he tried to separate those things. Well, maybe, there's probably some power, there's probably some pleasure. Well, no, power, taking pleasure in harming another person is part of the shit we're talking about here.
well, and so like that this thing is so like I've had many therapists, and that was one of the things that I learned from my very first therapist is that it had nothing to do with actual sex. It was all about power. This is about people exercising their power over you. That's what I
Mhm.
learned in therapy. So it to me it's a little bit like almost like I'm going back in the Stone Ages to hear him
Sure.
talking about this.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that we seem the idea of power, taking pleasure in abusing power. I think that is like I think that is a thing that I feel when I hear this, the way that Harvey talks about sexual abuse, I feel like that's what people like him are in denial about. That the pleasure isn't just like the pleasure of having an orgasm or whatever. Like
No, no.
the pleasure is the pleasure of abusing another person.
Hurting another person
Yeah, taking
through
pleasure
power,
in yeah.
taking power and control over that person's body, and many times they do it violently.
Mhm.
That's why they leave these rape victims bleeding and cut up, and they just I'm not going to go into further detail. I think our listeners probably have heard enough trauma, but guess what? Even thoughts and prayers can't help us here. Yeah, I think that's true. But anyways, let's continue. See if I have anything golden to ask him now, because I think I was kind of probably struggling.
That there's just no excuse for, no matter what.
There is no excuse. And you know what else? Like in one of my conversations with Jimmy Hinton, one of the things that we talked about was the whole how like abusers can walk into a room and within 30 seconds can pick out who their next victim is.
Wow. Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know. It's hard for me to get in anyone's skin to be able to just fathom how that would work. But I've heard the same kind of thing. Yes.
well, and when I took like a self-defense class, one of the things that they taught me too is that anything that deviates you from the norm can make you a target.
Hmm.
It can be as simple as the way you walk, it can be the way you carry yourself, it can be the way you interact with people, all of those things. And then they do test runs.
Sure.
Abusers do test runs
Hmm.
that to see how you react to that.
Sure. Sure. I can easily see where a person would, their perception would be that one person in this group or several persons in a given group are more vulnerable and easier targets.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is where, like, when you start looking into like some of the different things, so like children that have disabilities, one of the things I put it away, but in that article, one of the things that Tara talks about is children who are perceived as different from the norm inside of their culture. They
Hmm.
are automatically going to be at a higher risk.
Hmm. And maybe be more vulnerable too, in that they not only rely on people more for assistance in a variety of
Hmm.
ways, but may appreciate someone paying attention to them in a way that, because they have a lot more challenges to deal with in terms of navigating their way in a community of people.
Yep. And I have a question for you in regards to that. When he says that, children that are different, like they may appreciate somebody paying them more attention, is he really suggesting the idea that because children are disabled or they have like let's just say they're neurodivergent or they struggle that they're now going to appreciate that attention from the abuser?
Well,
Or is it what is he trying to say?
I don't know exactly what he's trying to say. I mean, again, it's sort of like there's a mix of things where like okay, like I might say that, but it would be in a completely like the way that I would contextualize it would be very different. Like he is in that bit there he's alluding to the grooming process. And the grooming process, it when a offender, when offenders are testing to see okay, who is protected, who is going to have someone stand up for them, um, who doesn't have the resources to set their own boundaries, which children generally don't, but some children have more resources than others. Like if their parents have taught them what the actual words for their body parts are, for instance, that's one thing that protects a child who may not even know what the word is for her vulva or her butt, or his penis or what have you. Like that's something that protects children. And we can certainly say okay, here are things that we need to teach children in order to make them less vulnerable, but there has to be so much care there. Like when the things that make people vulnerable are often then turned against them as well. Yes, this is the thing that made that essentially like the fact that you weren't getting attention at home, maybe, you know. So it's not uncommon for people who groom and target children for sexual abuse to notice who isn't who is not being parented enough. It doesn't mean that all children who are abused have negligent parents, but that is, like for instance, you can look at the people that Catholic priests targeted like a generation ago. And it was often people who were being raised by single mothers, and single mothers who felt that they needed to have a figure of male authority because they're in this very patriarchal context. So they're more than happy to welcome the priest in. I mean, that's a thing that creates a specific vulnerability. Like kids who ended up being abused by those priests may well have been very happy for the attention initially, but the way he framed it there, especially given some of the other things he said, like it immediately sets off my my victim blaming meter too, because
Okay.
it's just like,
Yeah.
you're not crazy for feeling that. Yeah.
Okay. So one of our listeners says someone just said that to me. Oh my God. And then has a follow-up comment as far as the victim enjoyed the attention.
I mean,
What Stephanie said, even if the child initially, or the victim or the survivor initially enjoys that attention, when somebody crosses those boundaries and abuses those people, it does not feel good. It is not enjoyable. It is harmful and it hurts you. I was that child, and I'm telling you that. And we did not ask to be raped. We did not ask to be sexually assaulted. We did not ask to be thrown against the walls. We didn't ask to be beaten. We didn't ask for any of that.
Yeah.
So whoever that was, please let them know that it is not their fault. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that places them, because they also have a lesser chance of like actually speaking up, because they may have communication difficulties. They may have, and so that just makes them at a higher risk.
Sure.
Just automatically, when you start talking about autistic children, you start talking about LGBTQ children, when you start talking about children who happen to have like some form of communication difficulty, like let's say they use sign language to communicate, or they may be deaf, or they may be blind, like automatically they are placed at a higher risk.
Absolutely.
But anyways, so our next thing that I really wanted to talk about a little bit is the silence. Like we were kind of talking about this, is when you have good boundaries versus when you tell yourself it's not so bad. I can live through this. Do you remember when we were talking about that, and we wrote it down because we really wanted to touch on this?
Yeah.
So what happens?
Yeah. In other words, is the sort of the feeling of a need for silence greater in a religious community of the kind that we have been a part of than in societies as a whole? I think it is true of human beings in general that our first attempt to, at our first response to any kind of wrongdoing is to try to protect ourselves from consequences. So that's a normal human response. So communities need to be very clear about the kind of boundaries they set and how those boundaries are reinforced. Because left to ourselves, without that kind of education, without that kind of orientation, we will tend to do what in the short run feels like the least painful response. In other words, that I can, if I can avoid even having this known, and somehow it can be swept under the rug, or let's just pretend, let's forgive and pretend this never happened. Uh, that's going to be the first human impulse.
So now you're talking about forgive and let's pretend it happened. That is, let's pretend it never happened.
I call that shoving it under the rug.
Mhm.
And I also want to point out that in my Amish communities, one of the things that I learned that. Do you have anything to say, Stephanie, about that? You're muted. You're muted, sweetie.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I don't
It's
even
okay.
understand. I don't even understand what he's saying. Like, is he making a generalization about like human being? What is he saying about human beings in general? I don't even get it.
Taking the easy way out.
I hate when people are like human beings in general do this. No, you don't actually know that. Like like taking
Well, and I feel like it's also a very skillful way of saying that survivors of abuse may take the easy way out rather than reporting it or going to the church.
I just in every way that every question that you ask him, it's his responses remove agency from survivors. He's not talking about he's not talking to survivors. He's not talking about survivors as though they're people. I mean, I just
Right.
Yeah. And no, Linda, you did not ask for any of that.
You didn't deserve any of
You
that.
did not deserve any of that. Yeah, anybody who remotely implies that is dealing in rape culture and victim blaming. Yeah.
I can't even understand what's happening here, to be honest. Like
I think I honestly I think that you're throwing him curveballs. I'm not even he's not even particularly coherent at this point because I'm not again I want to understand what his purpose is for approaching you in the first place. You know, if it's to talk about his horror about sexual abuse and how, plain communities need to address it, I'm not getting that here. What I'm getting is like somebody who really wants to talk about perpetrators, but he's not like when you started talking about how perpetrators choose targets and about vulnerability based on things like disability and the things that lead perpetrators to target people. These are very basic, well-known concepts in the world of sexual abuse prevention. And he's sort of nodding at you like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's just like, if you're not like, you don't need to know how to get inside of a perpetrator's head in order to understand that this is how perpetrators operate, like much of the time, because we have vast swaths of evidence showing this, and he's not interested in evidence. I'm not getting interest in evidence from him. He's speaking as though he's an expert, but he's not speaking in an evidence-based fashion.
right. It's a little bit frustrating.
I mean, I'm frustrated by it right now.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. It's just it's such a mix of lip service to good things and this slippery like no, that makes a lot of sense. But also offenders this and this and this. Here are things we can do for them. I think
There's not enough wine in the world for this.
Yeah. It's a mess. It's a mess, and which just keeps leading me back to Harvey, what were you hoping to accomplish, and what was your motivation for coming onto the podcast of Mary Byler, the Misfit Amish, to talk about this? Why were you doing it? Because this is real messy, dude. And you're not making a lot of sense, and you're not speaking as somebody who has a great deal of expertise with anything but a particular ideological fixation, if you will.
Oh, thank you. Should we continue the dumpster fire?
I mean, how much did you have a specific point that you wanted to get to in the interview tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
It's like 3 more minutes.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Growing up was, I must forgive. To forgive is, it means you never speak of it again. He's sorry, you never speak of it again. But is that truly a definition of forgiveness?
Well, I think it can be if forgiveness is a response to genuine acknowledgement of the wrongdoing, uh, a deep sense of remorse for the wrongdoing, a commitment to never doing it again, a commitment to having the kind of safeguards around you and accountability partners with you that can further reassure that this won't happen again, and a willingness to do whatever restitution is necessary. It might involve paying for a therapist for someone that you have violated. Uh, it might involve some kind of compensation of some sort. So if one thoroughly repents, that is, makes a 180-degree turn and is fully dealing with the weight of what they've done and facing it and not just minimizing it or avoiding it, then I do believe in forgiveness, but not cheap forgiveness, not forgiveness that's just based on, well, I feel badly, I feel terrible, etc., but forgiveness based on an actual change of direction, uh, and with an accountability system built around you. But I think what
So,
I think what Amish and other well-intentioned people have done is confused forgiveness with what I think of as a kind of a radical love for enemies. That is love for people who do wrong to you. And that love doesn't mean you overlook the crime. It means that you see that person as a human being who is capable.
that's a really, really good question, Stephanie.
I put it in private chat. Should we put it
Yeah.
here?
So Stephanie
Yeah.
asks, why are we assuming good intention of the Amish as a group? And
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
what would you like to say about that?
Well, I mean,
there are two of us here, and only one of us has been Amish. So,
well, so the interesting thing about Harvey is, remember, he was Amish too, but his experience with Amish differed vastly from my experience.
You think maybe?
But also, it's a fact of, like, there's a assumption of good intentions because Amish branding is good. It's almost like he buys into the narrative that people like Donald Krebiel, Steve Nolt, Karen Johnson, who writes about the lives of Amish women, okay, the lives of Amish women. I'm sorry, but that book is so gross it made me almost throw up. Okay, the people like, oh God, what's her name? Jeanette Harder. All of these people, along with the mainstream media in America, have sat here. Oh, and let's not forget the romance novel people. They
Yeah.
have sat here and they have over and over, they have perpetuated a narrative where anybody who wants to talk about child sexual assault inside of Amish communities basically gets it all brushed under the rug, and they buy into the narrative that Amish are just these good, godly, forgiving folk who can do no wrong. They forget that these people are just people. And inside of every group of people, there are some bad people. Period.
Yeah. And there are particular formations of, human community that we know create the conditions that foster sexual abuse. One of them is patriarchy. Another one of them is isolation and sectarianism. Like the Amish as a community, yeah, they're just people. And like I've said before, like they behave the way people behave in these particular kinds of formations, which is like the incentives to abuse power are great. And when you are disempowered within that community, you are really disempowered. So the way that he I mean one of the central things that I would like to talk about in the way that he talks about forgiveness is that he's not talking he's really interested in what the offenders do to earn forgiveness. He hasn't even talked about who gets to, who's doing the forgiving. Survivors are not part of the conversation at all. It's like, you believe in forgiveness, okay,
but cuts them out.
He cuts them out completely. Who, like that's that's the next question I'd want to ask him, if I had any faith that he would respond in good faith, or that it wouldn't just make me want to drink more wine. But like the next question I'd want to ask him is, so who gets to say when forgiveness is appropriate? Is it the bishop? That, like, who gets to determine that the perpetrator has made a 180? Who determines what is the power hierarchy in the community that is making that determination? And what role does the survivor and or survivors, there's usually more than one, what role are they playing in that? Like, if you're just eliminating them from the entire conversation, then like you're just blowing smoke out of your ass.
So I don't know if Mennonites do this, but inside of Amish communities, if you have committed a gross sin, also have a really bad echo for some reason. I don't know.
I don't, but shoot.
Yeah.
Did it start?
Let me see. No, it's gone now.
Okay.
Maybe. Sometimes, so like if you get in trouble with the church, like more than likely two of the ministers or a minister and a deacon, they'll come talk to you, and then they're the ones who decide. So they take it back to the entire church ministry, and those 5 people, like the bishop, the ministers, and the deacon, they all get together and they discuss your sins and whether or not you're repentant. So,
and do the people who you violate have any say in this at all?
They go talk to you, the offender,
and they make the determination.
That was my experience with my church ministry.
I mean, that's every person I've talked to from Plain background has told me something similar. I mean,
yeah.
When you don't have any power, it's a great situation for an offender who wants to get away with it.
Right.
I mean, when I mean, with mainstream Mennonites, I would, it's not like that necessarily, except when it is. I guess the structures of like MCUSA churches are more like modern in appearance. But who has power is often like the hierarchies aren't necessarily as rigid as they might be in a super legalistic authoritarian plain community.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that like sometimes power isn't particularly visible. Like I've worked with a number of survivors who have been in Mennonite communities who assume good of people and then find out how much power they don't have when they try to ask for accountability from people who they assumed were well-intentioned. So, I mean, I think that things like race, things like fitting in with the sort of social culture of the particular church, having the right last name, because Mennonites are still, ethnically obsessed, gender, obviously.
Yep.
All of those things play a role in how much power you have in mainstream Mennonite communities, for sure. It's just it feels, looking from the outside at what I perceive in plain communities, it seems like the hierarchies are more set in stone. I might be oversimplifying, but
Well, they may be more defined.
yeah. But either way, we've got patterns that are like the subject of forgiveness is just so frequently like when survivors are brought in, it's, well, you need to do this in order to heal. Well, that's absurd.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't ever have to forgive somebody to heal.
No.
Thanks.
No.
That's
No.
that's a statement. It's a fact.
Yeah.
And it's not even open for discussion. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
But let's finish this last like couple thing so we can have questions and our comments.
Capable of or in desperate need of redemption and change. And but when and if that change really occurs, and it is, there are people that can testify to the fact that it is happening, it's genuine, and the safeguards are there, then I do. But again,
We just your mic.
Am I not coming through clearly?
No, you've got a buzzing sound.
I don't know what is causing that. I don't hear anything.
Oh, now you're clear.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So I also believe in loving enemies, but that doesn't mean I leave enemies off the hook. It means I care for them as a human being who is a creation of God, just like I am. But I am, loving toward people, but very clear and definite in terms of my not condoning evil behavior.
So, does that involve like loving them enough to report them to law enforcement so that then they can be held accountable to the highest form of the law as any other citizen in America? And then let me ask you this, like, I don't know if you know this, or even if you cannot answer this question if you don't want to, but my question for you is like, when do you think that Amish and Anabaptist churches will start holding that same amount of compassion for victims that they put out for offenders? Okay, so I can't listen to any of this anymore. I gotta stop.
Okay.
Not tonight. Not tonight. Okay. But I think that's an excellent question, right?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm curious how he answered it, but not.
But do you want to watch it tonight?
No, no. If you're done, we're done. Like yeah.
Yeah, no. I gotta like close this video. I can't. Yep.
It's so toxic. It's yeah.
So we do have a comment here, and also, guys, if you have questions, feel free to write them in the comments, and we would be happy to answer them. But this one says, I tried for years to forgive and forget, yet here I am, and I can forgive if I choose to do so, but I will never forget, and I will not sit down and be silenced. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no moral advantage to forgetting and being silent. It's not more virtuous. It doesn't make you a better human being. Like forgive and forget is like forgetting is not how you break a cycle of violence.
Well, and what does the attempt of forgetting do to people who have PTSD?
It's devastating. Yeah.
Do you think in a way that when people who have PTSD, they attempt to just forget it and stuff it down, and it's like this denial that it ever actually happened? Do you think that is in any form harmful to the survivor?
Well, I mean, Yeah. I mean, I think I'm not speaking as a therapist. I'm speaking as an advocate. I'm speaking as somebody who frequently sort of accompanies survivors through attempts at getting accountability from communities that have enabled their abusers, or communities that have piled on and become complicit, and all. So what I observe is that there's and what I've experienced in my own life is that there's a great deal of healing that comes with accepting reality and what happened. And like there's a phrase from a book that I love. It's the book the book Six of Crows that my cat Inej, who was making appearances last week, is named after a character in there. And that character, there's a moment when she says, better terrible truths than kind lies. And that is something that I go back to as an advocate when I'm tempted to soften the truth about what I think is going to happen, because I don't want, I want to protect somebody. And I have to remember it never protects people to deceive them about reality. And I do think that if I can talk for a second about like the things that make a community healthy. I think in Mennonite and I'm sure Amish circles, there are a lot of survivors who don't want to face what happened to them. And so they become complicit in a community's abuse of other survivors, because it's easier to fight other survivors and to fight reality than it is to accept, yes, in fact, this happened to me too. I think I just think there's a tremendous amount of harm that happens for that reason. So, it really is one of the ways that we break cycles of communal violence is by refusing to forget, refusing to forgive. If forgiveness, like people are going to define forgiveness in all kinds of ways. I mean, it kind of drives me crazy that like we talk about it as though we all agree on what it is. Well, no, we don't. I mean, I've had plenty of survivors say, I can forgive, but I'm not, like what Linda said, I can forgive, but I'm not going to forget. And I have a suspicion that they're defining forgiveness differently than maybe a bishop would,
I have some words for you. Okay.
Okay.
I have been labeled a few times by a few different things, such as disobedient, unforgiving, defiant, bitter. And I'm here to tell you, if me talking about what happened to me and what was done to me as a child makes me all of those things, bring it. I'm just going to be sitting here drinking coffee. Y'all have fun.
Preach.
I don't have the time or energy to sit there and argue with people who are determined and committed to misunderstanding me and who I am and what I'm about. But that's my opinion. Everybody has to find their way of working through and living with what happened.
Do you know what I get accused of?
Witchcraft? I mean, are you a Satanist now?
Well, I was going to say what I get accused of is trying to destroy the church and Mennonites. And I'm sort of like, I mean, it used to really upset me. And now I'm like, okay, yeah, like if the bullshit that you're defending is the church that you think I'm trying to destroy, yes, of course I'm trying to destroy it.
I mean, if that's what this, okay, let me come on,
yeah,
bring it.
Okay, so questions?
What is your understanding of forgiveness?
You want to take a stab at that? Boy,
Sure, I guess I can. So, personally, I think that forgiveness for me just means that you don't wish any ill will towards the person. Doesn't mean you have to forget what happened. Doesn't mean you have to even rebuild a relationship with them or have contact with them. You don't ever have to talk to them again. You can talk about it as much or as little as you want to. It's up to you. This is your choice, and it is something that is very personal to you. And nobody ever has the right to demand that you give people forgiveness. It's my personal opinion. What about you?
I mean, honestly, forgiveness feels like kind of an empty concept for me because I've never. I'm sort of like, there are human beings who have done things to me that have caused me to never want to have anything to do with them again. And there are people who have done things or who, it's not like I'm somebody who's never caused harm in my life. Like, I'm grateful when people are like, you know what, you took responsibility for what you did, so we can still be in relationship. And I can extend that to other people, but words like grace and forgiveness are really tough for me because I've just heard Christians use them in so many icky ways that I tend to have completely different language for talking about what does it mean to be in relationship with people when they have caused harm to you or you have caused harm to them. And like when it comes to like sexual violence, I'm like it is a extraordinary
That's a no-go.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary situation where a survivor and a perpetrator would be in relationship ever again. Like, there's hardly whatever. Yeah.
Right. But so for example, if let me give you an example of like a situation where you may have a relationship where let's just say you do something that is harmful to somebody, and it's something that isn't at the same level, like it's not an abusive act necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And you take accountability for that, and you change your actions,
Right.
and you apologize.
Right.
That I would be more inclined to forgive.
Yeah. But that's different than sexually assaulting somebody or molesting, abusing
a child, or
yeah.
It's like that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we shouldn't conflate abuse and harm. They're not the same thing.
Right. They're two different things.
Yeah. I mean,
like for example, if like I accidentally like broke something of that had value, and it was an accident, but I did it because I was careless and I could have taken better care, I take accountability and responsibility for that.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So next question. How you forgive someone that is not sorry or repentant?
I don't know. Why would you?
You don't have to. Why would you forgive them?
Yeah.
I don't actually prescribe to that theology, so I can't really, I'm not an expert by any means, but I don't prescribe to that theology.
Yeah, I don't either.
I think that's
I mean, what I find is that, like, when Christians talk about repentance, especially when they're talking about repentance for sex offenders, that what they mean by repentance tends to be, if you say you're sorry in a way that affirms, like, my idea of reality, like, but there's so many perpetrators are very good at apologizing in ways that increase sympathy for themselves. And so I like the idea of, I don't know. I mean, repentance is another one of those words that I'm like, I've heard it applied to so many people who go on to do further great harm, to commit more abuse, to commit more sexual violence, that I'm like, I don't ever trust a Christian when they say somebody's repented. Like, what does that mean?
And who decides that? Again, is it the ministry?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think this is why so many churches are bad. Yes. We definitely see hypocrisy in it. Yeah. And again, that hypocrisy and like the ubiquity of that hypocrisy is part of why Christians are really like pretty bad at this. pretty bad at holding people accountable for this kind of abuse.
Yep.
Yeah. Forgiveness does not require reconnection. Yes, that is.
Hashtag facts. I'm telling you that.
Mm-hmm.
I like the concept of grave sin or
Yeah.
mortal sin. I know it sounds like a religious concept, but those are serious sins that cause irreparable harm. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things is when you start talking about abusive acts versus like just typical run-of-the-mill like things that may happen in the course of your day, like Stephanie said, it's very important to articulate between abuse and harm. It's two different things.
And the language around sin, I think is a good thing to talk about, because what I will often hear, especially evangelical Christians, say is like, well, we don't have a racism problem, we have a sin problem, or we don't have an abuse problem, we have a sin problem. And to me, that's just a way of changing the subject and overgeneralizing so that you don't actually have to deal with the issues at hand. So if you're working within a religious framework and you are talking about sin, I think it's really good to be like, have designations for like, no, like if you think that drinking a glass of wine is a sin, are you conflating it with raping a child? Because if you are, then we have a problem with our sin framework.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I'm sorry, but if somebody drinks like 2 glasses of wine in front of me and they feel bad about that's on them. I don't care about that.
Sure.
But if they rape a child, then I'm going to have a problem.
Well, and I mean, I'm sure you've run into this. I certainly have. I find that a lot of Christians are more offended by the words that we use to talk about sexual abuse than they are by the sexual abuse itself. Like I've seen Christians like rewrite liturgy and prayers to take out the word rape because they feel like the word rape is divisive, and it's like, I don't even know what to say to you. Why don't we worry about the fact that it happens?
It's just another way that they are silencing
Mm-hmm.
and rewriting the narrative to something that is more palatable for them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm kind of sick of it.
Yeah. Me too.
And I also refuse to talk that way about it. Do you have any final words before we end this?
Well, that was a shit show. And it was, I think, probably like really triggering for a lot of people. And I mean, at some point I saw somebody made a comment like, it's really hard for me when I hear men who talk this way, because I respond to them the way I respond to perpetrators. And like that, like that's a feeling that shouldn't be ignored at all. Like
Yeah.
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 I see why. I see why. Because it's yeah. Ugh.
Yeah. It's really gross. I think it's also important if you are watching this and you've made it through this far, I want to remind you that as survivors, try to be gentle with yourself and only do as much as you can. And also take good care of yourself. This is a brand new year. Happy 2022. We've got a lot of fun stuff coming up this year. And we're going to have those conversations that we keep having. And we're not going to stop. Because we're going to change things eventually, someday.
Amen. Ugh. How'd that come out of my mouth?
You better say praise be. Thoughts and prayers.
Praise be. Thoughts and prayers.
This concludes today's episode of the Disobedient Women. I sure hope all of you held on to your hats and bonnets and your buggy seats and drank lots of water. And I certainly hope that we will see you again. I hope y'all have a beautiful and wonderful day. It's time for that brandy old fashioned.